Welcome to the Purity for Life podcast, episode 147. This week we start a series on triggers, and we're talking about biological triggers. For more information on this podcast and other great content, visit purityforlife.me. Hey everyone, Frank Honus back with you guys this week on the Purity for Life podcast. Thanks so much for watching and listening. As always, our goal is to help men and women find sexual integrity through Jesus Christ, and excited to continue that. And excited for, thrilled to be back for another kind of a fresh episode for you guys this week. I want to start this week a series, if you will. Not a sermon series, but a sort of a series on triggers. And so for the next several weeks, I want to talk about the different kinds of triggers that a man or woman goes through and experiences in the sexual, the recovery process from a sexual addiction, from pornography addiction, the different kinds of triggers that a person feels. Now, I say that word trigger, and that may or may not be familiar to you, depending on where you're at in your recovery, and what your goal is, and kind of you're just where you are on the road to freedom and healing. And so let me first just say this: that a trigger, by definition, is essentially something that kind of sets you off and leads you down a path of relapse or a slip, what I like to call slip or a relapse. Relapse being more extreme, a series of slips, and then a slip being kind of a one-time, mistake, or kind of a fall back into looking at porn, using porn or masturbating or whatever. But a trigger is what comes before the acting out. A trigger is, again, like I said, whatever it is that kind of pulls you into the direction of, that temptation to want to, act out, to want to look at porn, to want to masturbate. So a trigger is essentially, kind of what puts you over the edge. And for so many people, we don't understand. I think a lot of people don't understand the incredible importance of knowing what your triggers are in your recovery journey. I talk to men. I've worked with a lot of men over the last 7 years, and 6 or 7 years. Worked with a lot of men, talked with a lot of men about their recovery journeys, and it's amazing to me how many guys, I talk to, and I ask them. They share with me they've had a slip this week, or they kind of made a mistake this week and looked at something or whatever, and I asked them. I said, so. What led up to that? What was the trigger? How were you feeling? Kind of what happened before you looked at porn or masturbated. And so many guys don't know. They don't take time to really think about that, or they don't really realize how crucial it is to know what their triggers are. And so it's really, really important to know. What is the setup? Again, what is it that's pulling you into the direction of falling, of a slip, of a relapse, of kind of, back into that place of addiction, or back into that place of struggle. And so I want to talk about what triggers are and the different kinds of triggers over the next several weeks. And I'm going to be talking from an article here from Bill Herring, who is a licensed clinical therapist and counselor, certified in sexual addiction therapy. And I want to be kind of reading and talking a little bit from an article that Bill actually wrote. This is from several years ago, an article that he wrote entitled, "What Are the Triggers of Sexual Addiction Relapse?" And I love how he kind of organizes and kind of categorizes these different triggers, because I think it helps us to, decide, what slot does this trigger go into? Does it go in the environmental? Does it go in the psychological? Where does this, trigger fit? What compartment does it go into? Because again, just as a side note, triggers can be absolutely anything. A trigger can be, and we're going to talk about some of them today, this week on the podcast. But a trigger can be anything and everything. And for guys, for men, a trigger is different for every man. Every guy has different kinds of triggers. Every guy has different kinds of pulls, things that lead them into sexual addiction. And so we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna talk about 5 different kind of categories of triggers, and what they are, and we're gonna kind of work backwards because we're gonna talk about in the coming weeks we're gonna talk about environmental triggers, okay, psychological triggers, opportunistic triggers, cognitive triggers, and then tonight, this week, biological triggers, which is really the first area that I want to start talking about, which is biological triggers. What are biological triggers? And so kind of reading here from Bill's article, it says basic physiological influences can trigger sexual impulses. Awaking with an erection or simply going for periods of time without sexual release can serve as seemingly compelling reasons to engage in sexual behavior. And so I'll just kind of stop there and kind of let that marinate a little bit. Biologically, I think every single man biologically can be triggered and probably is triggered because there are physiological, biological influences that can sort of tap into our impulses, to our compulsion, to our need or our medication, medicating ourselves with porn. And he gives a couple examples here, awaking in the middle of the night or the morning with, being aroused, sexually aroused, or just, like you said, long periods of time where there is no sexual release, this can be an incredibly tempting reason for so many men to act out or to engage in sexual behavior. And I think about, men that are single. I think about guys, guys that I know and myself at one point. This was, biologically, this was a huge trigger for me. So many triggers in this area, biological. But I remember this being, a total, an area that I really struggled in, that this was where a lot of my triggers came from, biologically. And so many men, use this sort of reason and this biological component here, this physiological component, to justify using porn and or masturbating, and it's a huge area of temptation and can be a huge trigger for guys. This is the reality when we have our bodies, to deal with, when we have the feelings inside of our bodies. That craving, and that sense of needing that release, in our bodies, presents itself to be a huge trigger. And so Bill goes on to say here, he says, the ability, and this is kind of a huge principle here, the ability to engage in healthy sexual partnering is of great value in channeling biologically driven sexual drives. So let me just say that one more time. The ability to engage in healthy sexual partnering is of great value in channeling biologically driven sexual drives. Any effort to avoid masturbation or engage in a period of constructive celibacy is more likely to succeed when a person is engaging in healthy self-care. So it really starts with you taking care of yourself. It really starts with you paying attention to your body, to how you feel, to your emotions, to your diet, to your nutrition, to your exercise, to your sleep patterns. Taking care of yourself, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, is healthy self-care, and will go a long way in the process of you being able to kind of respond to biological triggers in a healthy way, in a constructive way. He says this is where the acronym HALT can be so useful. And HALT stands for hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and warns that basic human needs for sustenance, rest, companionship, and emotional balance are crucial to keep from falling into unhealthy behaviors that can result in dire, unintended consequences. And so, I use this acronym so many times with the guys that I work with the men in the online group that I lead. But HALT, it's an easy acronym to remember, and each one of those ideas for a lot of guys kind of fit in those four kind of slots right there. In that moment, in those moments leading up to the slip, right, leading up to the relapse or whatever. Are you hungry, right? Are you just, your appetite is hungering for something? Are you angry, frustrated, bitter, those kinds of things? Anger, I think, is a huge trigger for acting out. Lonely, man, this is probably the biggest out of HALT, is just that sense of loneliness, and for many guys, just feeling by themselves that no one loves them, no one likes them, no one thinks they're attractive, and just getting that finding that release and finding that, satisfaction in porn, finding that companionship, if you will, but lonely and then tired. This is another huge one, probably lonely and tired being the two of the biggest ones here, or but all these hungry, angry, lonely, tired. I can't even begin to tell you how many times in my past, in my former, in my days and years of struggle, where just fatigue and feeling tired, and feeling the sense of just physically drained, emotionally drained, mentally drained, led me to act out, led me to look at porn. But it's important to know that acronym HALT. Easy one to remember for when you're struggling, to be aware of what, like I said, what's happening before the acting out occurs, before masturbation, before looking at porn. Understanding how you're feeling in those moments is so huge, and being able to kind of pick up on these triggers, it's really big. And so triggers are an inevitable part of recovery. They're going to happen. They're going to happen for quite a while, I would say, in the recovery journey. The place that I'm at right now, not that there's never any triggers or temptations, but you do get to a place where you're able to identify the trigger, you're able to see it, identify it, and deal with it in a healthy way. And I do feel like I'm at the place right now where I've grown to be able to handle that and recognize that for what it is. But so this week, biological triggers. I would just ask you this question. What are your biological triggers? Is this an area that you feel particularly triggered in? It may or may not be. But again, in the coming weeks, we're going to be talking about these different categories of triggers and where you kind of fall into that. But I think this is probably a good one to start with, because I think this is one that every single guy has felt pulled by. The basic, dealing with the craving, the longing for release inside of your body, and whether that is a sexual dream, a wet dream, whether that is, like I said, waking up aroused with an erection, or just that extended long period of time without a sexual release. But biologically, we have got to engage ourselves, and there's certain things, and this is kind of where we get a little bit into the weeds, but sexual dreams are going to happen. And I found in my own recovery that for quite a while, especially in the early part of my recovery, that would happen quite a bit, and I would have sexual dreams, and there would be that biological release, and to a degree, I almost want to say we almost have to sort of grow out of that in some ways. And I think our body conditions to our growth and kind of learns, if you will. But at the same time, I want to be really careful how I say this. As you progress in your recovery, those things will happen, and certainly in a dream, you're not choosing to have that dream, so you have to be careful with how much you feel responsibility over that. And I know that in my past, when I've had those dreams, it's been it feels really discouraging, and I almost take some sort of responsibility over it. But in some ways, it's really not your fault. It's a product of of the things that you have looked at, and so to some degree, you want to take ownership over it. But it's something that happens, and so to a degree, it's not under your control, and yet the way you respond to it certainly can be under your control. And so that's our trigger this week that we're talking about is biological triggers. And again, where do you fall into that? Have you struggled with that before, and are you, dealing with biological triggers in a healthy way? So want to encourage you to think about that this week and to pray about that, just to kind of process through that in your journey. And also want to encourage you to head over to the website purityforlife.me, where I am going to be linking this article and kind of copying so that you can read this article for yourself and the different kinds of triggers here. And again, this is from Bill Herring, and Bill Herring's actual website, which is Bill Herring, BILLHERRING.com, BillHerring.com. Some really great material on there, some really great content. So I thank him ahead of time. I've never met Bill before, but sure, Bill, I appreciate very much, using your content, giving you credit because it's your credit. But thank you so much to Bill for that. So great article. And I would encourage you guys to go over there and read that. Again, the name of the article is "What Are the Triggers of Sexual Addiction Relapse?" and was written on August 27th, 2009. So, but still very relevant. I mean, eternally relevant, at least in this world, for the time that we have here on Earth. But these are great. Environmental triggers, psychological triggers, opportunistic triggers, cognitive triggers, and then tonight what we talked about this week, biological triggers. So we're going to be talking about more about those in the coming weeks, where they kind of fit in, and questions that you can be asking yourself. Where you kind of land on that. So I thank you guys so much for watching and listening to the Purity for Life podcast this week. Head on over to purityforlife.me for lots of great content during the week, and all the links in for the archive for our past podcasts. But this has been episode 147 of the Purity for Life podcast. So thanks so much. Have a great week. Praying for you that you focus, that you do your best this week to be a person of sexual integrity with all your heart. Fight for it. It's so worth it. It's so worth it. God wants you to be a person, a woman of sexual integrity, of wholeness, and the man or the woman that He's called you to be. So thanks so much for watching. We'll talk to you soon. God bless.